Works great. Welcome to the application spotlight on application papers and how we should deal with them. My name is Johanna. Next to me, there are my co-organizers of the application spotlight, Christina and Daniel. We will start with a quick introduction. So these are the three of us. We basically came together to discuss, based on our experiences mainly, how application spotlight papers should be treated at Vis in the future. And for the motivation, we would like to present you some reviewer comments that we got within the last years, and which were kind of the motivation for organizing this application spotlight at the end. So for example, here we have a very nice one. To the best of our knowledge, we are the first to combine and visually process data from X or Y fields and Z. And then the reviewer comment was, this may be true, but this isn't really a Vis contribution in itself. It's rather an application of existing Vis techniques to a slightly different dataset. Okay. Next reviewer comment. I also think that for the scope of this conference, it would be better to expand further on the visualization part of the paper, even if reducing the other parts of the paper, namely those exclusively related to the technologies itself. So it's a little bit into the direction how to structure such a paper. Obviously, there is also not a consent here. And the third one, in sum, a combination of several existing techniques has limited novelty. The authors are suggested to explicitly clarify the novelty of the used visualizations, such as which task cannot be solved by the previous methods and why it is non-trivial. Again, novelty, how to define that. And, oops, I wanted to have this slide first. So as a summary, application papers are now a new area in the Vis community, in the area model. There's one area about application papers. And the way it is described, how to submit such a manuscript, leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And so the question arose how to deal those papers, how to structure those papers, how to define a novelty in an application paper, what do we expect from application papers? And this is something that we would like to discuss today. This is our agenda for today. We are now doing the introduction. Afterwards, we have 3 talks from our panelists, Anders, Thomas, and Helmut. They will be 10 minutes each. And then we will have a panel discussion with the 3 panelists that we have here. Questions can be asked over Slido. There is the Slido QR code outside the room if you would like to ask questions. And also you can also rate questions. So when there are questions already available in Slido, you can also rate them so that we can see which is really of interest for you. And then we will end with a wrap up about 10 minutes at the end. All right, that's so far from the introduction. So we will move on to the next part, which are 3 talks from our panelists. And I will hand over to Daniel to introduce our first speaker.
So our first speaker is Anders Innemann from Linköping University. He is a professor for scientific visualization and is working on developing new visualization concepts and bringing them into application. And these application areas, there are many application areas where you work, like medical visualization, astronomy, AI, and many more. So enjoy.
Oh, okay. Okay, let's see if I can just get the presentation going? Oh, thank you. All right. That's great. Okay, very good. Great, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share with you a few thoughts and reflections over applications. And since I don't have that much time, I will just be very, very brief. I was asked by Johanna and the organizers here to just very briefly introduce myself and then give a few examples of applications and also a few insights to share with you. Many of you are familiar with the place that I come from. It's the Visualization Center, and it's really driven by a lot of application work that we're doing, but it's also combining a lot of different efforts. You know, the environment contains public spaces for science communication. It contains 120 people working on visualization research in itself. And it's also a lot of companies and students. So it's like this sort of melting pot for things that are going on in our community. But I would say that it's driven by the desire to apply the results that are coming out and doing that in the public spaces that we have. For instance, when you come to us, you will be exposed to exhibits showcasing interesting application domains, but at the same time, telling the story about the technology and the visualization behind all of these environments. And of course, we have a big dome theater, which is sort of my passion to be in a dome theater. And I just came from Montreal from the Immersa meeting where I showcased flying through the wonderful world of Drew Berry, looking at the mitochondria and being immersed inside of the human cells. It was pretty amazing. But what I wanted to do is to reflect a little bit over, you know, the notion of using public engagement as really a driver for application-oriented research that we're doing. And if we just start off, and it's a little bit of a simple visualization that I put together. You know, we start off with the domain experts, and we have this desire to connect the domain experts with the visualization research that we are doing. And this is sort of the standard approach that many of us have. But the case that I'm going to make is that if you add another component in this chain, if you add the notion of the science communication and you tie these things together, it can add benefit to visualization research and also to the application domain, because that is a really demanding area that you're working with. Contains things like you have to work with those domain-specific tools that you are developing. You have to do some authoring and storytelling in a new way to address, and we've seen that in many, many cases, how do I make it possible for a general audience to interact with fairly complex applications and data. The robustness of the software, anything that can break will break in a public space. The kids are, you know, breaking things on a regular basis for you. So that's pretty cool, right? And you have to do a lot of design on simplifications to make it possible, and the storytelling component of that. So, but, you know, it also produces a lot of communication material and a lot of user feedback. And, you know, it's a gold mine for data if you're interested in doing research on how the user studies, not using 10 domain experts, but 100,000 kids. And that's pretty cool. So it gives you a lot of added value if you actually go that extra mile and doing this in the public space. You get a lot of comments, you get questions, and you get a lot of satisfaction out of this. If you're a domain expert, you know, for me on a Saturday when I come into our dome theater and I do the journey of the universe for children, and it's so rewarding because you're actually seeing your science, your visualization at work in that kind of space. And also, I mean, a few examples of this, we sort of invented this crazy word that we call exploration, because what we are trying to do is to combine the notion of exploratory and explanatory visualization and doing that at the same time. And we didn't have a good word for that, so I apologize for inventing this crazy word, exploration. But I think that's essentially what we're doing. And here you can see an example of that, how we're taking the medical domain, the radiologist and their research, and just taking that data, taking those methods, those visualization approaches, and putting it out in the public space. But in doing that, We are combining many of those components that we have been researching over so many years. In this case, our multi-resolution volume rendering framework that we've been working on for many, many years, and putting that together. And then we're creating this sort of new way of interacting. And this has turned out to be a huge success, and many of you heard this over and over again from me with this particular application. But what I'm saying, that is also opening up a venue to publish your application research. And for us, it was really great that we got featured in the communications of the ACM, where we could really address those issues, the difficulties in moving from the domain experts area and bringing it out into the public space. And it's a good, nice paper to read. If you're interested in that, look it up, ACM December 2016. And it's even cooler if you go to the British Museum. I mean, all my friends, and when I go to London, I always go to the British Museum, and I can say, hey, that's our visualization there next to the oldest mummy they have, right? And that's pretty cool. So it's really a rewarding thing to do those kinds of applications. Another thing I just have to mention as well is, of course, the open space project. If we're looking at those big immersive environments with this sort of crazy idea of being able to browse the whole universe, and do that in an engaging way, and bringing in that kind of audience, and bringing data from all kinds of sources and turning it into this. And everyone has seen Alex Bock running around here. Alex is the brain behind the open space software. So with the help of Alex and his team, we managed to create experiences like, you come to a dome theater and you can tell the story about your science. And it's really engaging. It's really interesting for a general audience to hear about the science. But what we also do at the same time is that we also tell the story. You become the embodiment of the story of the technology behind those discoveries and how we can show them. And I think that's the essence of the kind of application work that we do, is to be able to use that as a carrier for raising the interest in mathematics, in engineering, in programming in the next generation. But at the same time, we get to show this to the domain experts. So here you have 100 astronomers sitting in the dome in New York and looking at their large 1 billion stars in the Gaia data set for the first time, and getting engaged, finding new discoveries that they hadn't seen before because of the large-scale visualization that we are exposing them to. Many of these people were sort of very skeptic about visualization before they got into the dome. But even the hardcore astronomers were like, yeah, this is useful. And it was really helpful for them. All driven by the research that's coming out of the community. But you also get a chance to collaborate with some really interesting organizations. If you do application-oriented work, I mean, it's great to be able to work with the Goddard Space Flight Center. We have the American Museum of Natural History as a partner here. We have NYU, and the Ski Institute is here, of course, as well, and the Norrköping Visualization Center. And that's sort of a very, very creative environment to work in. Now, I know that I'm running out of time, Johanna, but I just wanted to point you towards one piece of paper. A few years ago, we actually had a panel on application papers at Vis, and I had the privilege to be a part of that. And we wrote up all of those insights that we gained from that panel and turned it into a CGNA paper. And I think if you read that, you will find there's like 15 different ways that an application paper can have a contribution. And I think we need to recognize that more in our community, just like was said here before. So go have a look at that. My final slide, I was always asked to give a little bit of a personal reflection on why applications are so important, why we need to reach out. And for me, going back to 1969, and I was 6 years old, and some of you may have seen this picture before, but it's hilarious, right? That's me. So I just wanted to finish off on that note with the young little astronaut Anders in 1969, and that was the inspirational moment for me. And we should not underestimate the power that the application has in inspiring people to go into our domain. Show why we are doing the visualization is so important to raise the interest, to pass through those first years of hardcore math and be able to do that kind of programming and to see the results. And this is what the application does for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So our next speaker is Thomas Bischko. He is a full professor with the Wright State University and leading the Advanced Visual Data Analysis Group And in that group, he does a lot of virtual reality and big data analysis for a variety of different applications, such as medical visualization, biological visualization, and visualization in engineering. So go ahead.
Thank you very much. Let's see if we can get this to work, since it didn't earlier. Okay. 60 hertz, right? Okay, I should be ready. No, apparently not. Okay, do your magic. So I only have 60.019 hertz. And I can change the resolution to something else. If that...
Can you disable mirroring?
That's the internal. Yeah, it's not the only one.
Advanced display setting. Now if you maximize it should work.
Nope.
The same issue we had with the keynote speaker. Someone else? Yeah, there's one here. Do we have a computer to use? PowerPoint. This one works, so that it works. Yeah, okay. Let's try it first.
Perfect. Thank. Oh. Oh. That's not here. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. So I'm in the ungrateful spot to follow Anders because he always has such cool stuff to show. So you won't see as many nice things, but I threw up a little collage collection, whatever you want to call it, for of all the things some of the things we've done. I covered a lot of medical imaging and medical data. With Christina, we started some molecular stuff. The dragonfly thing we had reconstructed a few years ago, actually here at Vis. So I think there's a lot of interesting applications. And before I go to the next slide, a little disclaimer, a caveat, if you're sensitive to seeing very, not necessarily graphic stuff from a medical perspective, but it is basically a corpse that we overlaid something on. So close your eyes if you want to for a minute. while I go to that slide. So I wanted to just give you a heads up. It's not too bad, really. But this shows you a few examples of things we did with augmented reality. On the right side, you see a little training kind of setup where we basically overlay data onto, in this case, the mannequin that nurses use for the training. On the left side is basically a rib cage overlaid onto, in this case, it's a corpse. It's a dead body. Somebody donated themselves. And we basically wanted to see how accurate that reconstruction or that overlay basically is. So this is basically a CT scan of that same person. And the surgeons wanted to know how well they can see the ribs inside through the augmented reality visualization, so that they can basically get away with a smaller incision and therefore have less recovery or shorter recovery time as a result. So there's lots of interesting applications. And I absolutely agree with what Anders was saying earlier. It can be very rewarding with the kind of data that you're working with, the kind of insight you're getting, and also the result. I mean, ultimately, particularly with medical, same thing with other areas, though, you're helping basically people. So this project where we extracted and basically help with diagnosing different kind of diseases, mostly arterial diseases. You can see here we received data from Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, UC San Francisco sent us some data that we analyzed for some of their patients, even as far as South Korea, who sent us some data directly. So very rewarding from that perspective. As you can see, this is not necessarily publication in Vis, but you get to publish in other areas as well. So I think the highest impact ratio or impact factor paper we had was in radiology, which has an impact factor of 29. So that's pretty high impact from that perspective. And so basically, since I think it is important and rewarding to work with applications, it can be a little tricky. I had a doctoral presentation about this topic a few years ago, how to basically get people to work with you. There's trust issues, of course, because medical personnel, they trust you with their data. So oftentimes, if you're talking patient data, there's sensitivity involved. FERPA regulations here in the US, and I'm sure other countries have similar standards. So they have to trust you with the data. And of course, on the other hand, they have to trust your results. Because ultimately, the physicians or surgeon or whoever you're working with is kind of on the hook with respect to if something goes wrong, they're basically the responsible party. So it basically requires some trust to establish a good connection with any kind of application or with the application domain itself. And with respect to publishing at Vis, it's gotten a little better thanks to Anders and Gunther, and I don't remember who else was involved in there. Basically making this aware. I think the application papers are an important aspect to Vis and should be an important aspect at this conference. And it has gotten a little more accepting, but there certainly are still issues that are basically that we should resolve. So essentially some more challenges and that's basically why we're meeting here as well. One of the aspects I think is the evaluation part. That's kind of what the remaining slides I have are touching on. And a few years ago, we met at Dachstuhl, and one of the outcomes, well, usually we publish a book as a result of many of these Dachstuhl workshops. This one is kind of interesting. That's why I'm pointing this out here, because it doesn't follow a typical paper kind of thing. It was basically a discussion between David Laidlaw and myself, and Krasimir basically moderated the whole session about how an appropriate evaluation could look like for an application paper specifically, really in this context. And so some of the things I wanted to point out that basically, in order to be a valuable contribution, I don't think it has to be a completely novel approach from that perspective. And Anders kind of pointed to that as well to some extent. But of course, you need to show some kind of value that you're adding to what was there before. It doesn't have to be a user study. There could be other measures as well to showcase that it's a valuable contribution. You can see at the very bottom, enabling new capabilities, for example, improving efficiency in some way. It could be on the computational side, but it could be on the user side as well, making the user more efficient. You saw the rib cage as one of the examples, where we basically can allow or enable the physician or the surgeon to make a small incision. So that could certainly be something that is valuable. A few things on user studies. The discussion in that paper that I'm pointing to alludes to this as well. Doesn't have to be always a user study, but if you do a user study, make sure it's properly executed. Reasonable number of participants, actual users. If you just grab 5 people that are wandering the hallway, probably not a good candidate pool of participants. Design your protocol properly. Appropriate statistical evaluation. There's a lot of discussion, and there's some people in the Vis community that are very vocal about using proper statistical tools, confidence intervals as one example. Personally, I like to provide as many different statistical measures to basically cater to various different audiences, but certainly useful to provide more than, I don't know, a t-test, which is very questionable and you can find papers about that. One thing to keep in mind with user studies in general is, I don't know how I'm on time, but basically, remember you're doing basically a black box test. You're feeding your visualization approach into the black box, which is basically your participant pool, and then you're getting some data out of that. And so essentially you can showcase correlation based on that, but not necessarily causation. So those are 2 different things, and you want to be careful about that, simply because if you write a paper and your summary basically alludes to something, then it stays in the literature forever, basically, and some people rely on that, and they may not question it as much as the authors or the reviewers might have. So you want to be careful. I like to refer to the medical domain, where you can find papers that are cited a lot and used a lot, but they're not as well-founded as you would want them to be. And we want to avoid that if at all possible. And with that, I'm basically stopping here and hand it back to Christina. Joanna?
Thank you very much, Thomas. You can decide if you want to leave it on or take it off, whatever you prefer, yeah. No, it was totally fine. We could very well understand you. Okay, our last panelist is Helmut Dolaesch. Helmut did his PhD in Vienna at the TU Wien, and then basically directly moved into application-oriented research at the IEEE Vis. He then founded a spin-off for flow visualization, which was bought by CD Adepco and which was then bought by Siemens. There's always a larger fish somewhere. And he's now with Siemens Digital Industries, and he's really working closely with domain experts, and we are looking forward to your talk.
Thank you, Johanna, for the kind introduction. Happy that this works here now. Hope so. Yeah. No. Why not? Okay, great, thanks. So thanks again for the kind introduction, Johanna. basically you mentioned nearly everything that is on my first slide here already. So it's right after my PhD, which I did at the Vis, and actually already at the PhD level, we worked closely together with application specialists from the AVL. I then moved into a lot more application research projects. I was leading the interactive visual analysis group at the Vis, where we did work with a lot of different kinds of application specialists and researchers, application researchers. I did then found this company, and as you said, the larger fish was coming every time. And now we are with Siemens. So in the interest of time, let me go into a couple of first slides from my older works back in when I was in research. And that's sort of my history with application here at the Vis conference, but also at other venues like Eurovis and other similar conferences. So the first one here on top that you see the visual analysis of complex time-dependent simulation results of a diesel exhaust system. That was some work which we did together with researchers or with application engineers actually from AVL. AVL is a company in Austria that is working on diesel engine development and testing systems, both simulation and testing, as well as exhaust systems. And in this case, it was an exhaust system that we were investigating here. And so that was really very nice work where we could show that introducing an already existing way of how to visualize data into a new field, namely into the application domain of diesel engines here and diesel exhaust systems, did work out nicely and led to a couple of new interesting answers to those researchers. And then on the lower left, you see an example that we did, or mostly Bob Laramie actually did, present here at the Vis conference together with us and with people in Kaiserslautern, where we were looking again with the same group into fluid flow in a cooling jacket, how to analyze the fluid flow, how to optimize it if it doesn't work nicely, so if the cooling doesn't work correctly. That was another example here. But we also worked in other fields, of course. This is from the medical field. So this is work that we did together with the people from university in Magdeburg, where we were looking in how to apply interactive visual analysis techniques for 3D time-dependent perfusion data. In that example, we were looking at stroke patients and how the perfusion after a stroke would be changed in the data and how that would be investigated and explored. A very nice example was also presented here at Vis back then. And another example also from the medical field from work together with colleagues at the ZIP in Berlin and together with an ENT physician, Thomas Hildebrand, where we were looking into how to analyze and explore the nasal airflow. So we did scan patients, individual geometries from patients through scans, did set up simulations, did then all the visual analysis and exploration, and tried to come up with answers of what could lead to an improvement in certain cases for the nasal airflow in problematic cases where people might have some limits for their breathing. And again, here we were using existing techniques, as you can see here, scatter plots. I mean, all these things and parallel coordinates, all these things have been around before, but we were using them in a new context, answering concrete user questions, and I think that was the interesting part here again. One more example here from a completely different field. That's work that we did together with meteorologists in Austria. So there is a group, Meteomedia, which is doing severe weather warnings for Austria. And in this specific case, we were looking how we could apply our visual analytics techniques on 3D radar data, so from weather radar. That was coming in live streamed every couple of minutes, combine it together with other types of station data and measurements and whatever, and set up a system that could then help to analyze and clearly identify how to, so try to identify how situations of large hail could develop and build up. And actually what you can see here on the lower right in this image is one of these examples where a squall line that was coming in over Vienna, we were analyzing that, and then they were seeing that we have these skewed amounts in the 3D display, which they never have been able to see before because they were always looking only at 2D slices on different slicings. And so that was really interesting for them to see and then they could combine it with linking and brushing with other different views and get some answers, and use that then in the end to identify automatic measures that would warn them in the future. And that system has been in place for a couple of years and has been replaced by a better system now. But that was in principle the beginning of their work there that they did. Couple of other, I don't want to go into too much detail here. On the upper right, you might remember that's the Vis contest, the first one that we ever had in 2004 at the Vis conference in Austin, where we were lucky enough to win that contest. And so that was really very interesting work that we did there. This was one of the examples where we did not very closely work together with application specialists, but tried to build up our application knowledge ourselves, which sort of worked. But it was happy to see, we were very happy to see afterwards that application specialists actually came to us and wanted to work with us then on that. So that was also good. Going back to what we are doing now. So as Johanna said, we are at Siemens Digital Industries, and I'm working in a group developing CFD, so computational fluid dynamics, as well as a general multiphysics simulation software that is called SimCenter Star CSIM Plus, which is part of the larger SimCenter brand that we are having there. And as you can see, you don't have to read that here. As you can see, there's a lot of different applications already in that simulation suite that we have there. So it's not just only CFD simulation and not just for a specific application field, but it's all types of different simulations. It's even going into what we see here on the second piece, the design explorations or ensemble simulations, how to look into ensemble simulation runs and visualize them, and all kind of different applications. And I'm showing you now a couple of pictures as well as videos here to show you also that we have all these different applications, so marine applications, for example, here, and all those pictures and animations, they actually have not been done by ourselves. So we are developing the software, and our users are then using that software to come up with visualizations like that, both to highlight what they have found, but also to explore in the first step. And when I speak of our users, I mean what I'm showing you here, it's not our external users, so our customers, because I can't show that here, of course, obviously, but we also have internal users. That is a very interesting concept. So we have dozens of internal users. Those are the technical specialists as well as the application specialists for the different applications fields. And they would work closely together with our key customers then to come up and understand what their problems are, bring back their questions, and then we would try to integrate new technologies to help them solve that. And our internal application specialists will then showcase and try, showcase that to the external customers, basically. So this is something that we worked on here. Of course, you have to do things like come up with a system for keyframe animation that you build into your system, for example. And I'm showing you these pictures just very quickly here, so that you see that we have lots of different applications. Automotive obviously is one. Here you see again a combustion example on the right-hand side. I was happy to see that my PhD work did also end up still in our software suite there. It's now not called linking and brushing anymore, but data focus, but it's basically the same. So trying to do data linking and exploration there, and also view linking for multiple comparisons of multiple simulation runs here on the left-hand side. And we also work a lot for people to allow them to do collaboration, because most of our customers, not only since COVID came around, but even before, have been working in a distributed environments. So we have a lot of users, a lot of customers who have multiple offices around the world. People want to work together. And so we have a mechanism for all of our visualizations to not only be done locally, but to be shared via servers. And then clients in different places can connect to those, and you can either use on-screen clients or you can use virtual reality clients. You can use now also web clients, so basically web-based visualization, so it's all included. And most of our applications are transient. So here you see two more examples. And with transient, I mean, again, that everything that we do is intrinsically in situ already. So of course you can also set up out of core post, which you do traditionally, but most of the things that you see here, they are run through during the simulation already the visualizations are produced and output. One more slide, coming back to, and this time one not so successful history that we had with applications at Vis, and actually it's nice that we end up where Johanna started off here. So we also had our not so successful submissions. This was one of them. We submitted that in 2004. I think that was actually one very interesting piece of work that we tried to submit here, also with our research colleagues from AVL, and where we were looking into applying interactive visual analysis for time-dependent moving grids in a diesel engine case. Nobody has ever done that before. It was never published before, but still the reviews that we got back were basically in the same line that Johanna was showing. So not enough novelty. It's just another application of the same thing. And so, yeah, this is probably also a motivation why we continue to work on that. That's it from my side. And just the usual plug here. We also look for people every time.
Thank you very much, Helmut. So we will now really range a little bit. So we would like to actually place you here in the middle. And if we do it with a little bit of distance, you may also put off your mask. So however you feel more comfortable. Geht's? Ich habe die Fragen im Laptop, ja. Yeah. Can we turn off the projector probably? Is that possible? Because otherwise we will have blind panelists afterwards. Very nice, thank you. We will start out with an easy question, and in the meantime, please feel free to fill in questions in Slido. I would like to start out with one question. Wolfgang, you deleted it again, but may I still ask it? An easy one for the beginning for Anders. Wolfgang wanted to know whether you still have the helmet that we saw on the picture.
No, I don't have it. I think I have pieces of it left in a box somewhere. But you know, the funny story is that my brother wanted to become an ice hockey player, so he got an ice hockey helmet, and I really was inspired by Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, so I really wanted this space helmet, and I got it. And the funny thing is that, you know, I refused to take it off. So first thing I woke up in the morning, I put on the helmet, and I didn't take it off. So they had to feed me sandwiches through the visor, and I opened it up, and for several weeks, that was my mother is telling a story about this too.
Thank you. So now for all of you, as a first question, we would ask you, how would you define an application paper? So what is an application paper for you? And I will now pass around the mic and looking forward to your comments.
Well, I don't know. I would go by the definition by the name. I mean, you have some application in mind, working with a domain specialist in some way, and that basically defines kind of the topic, but of course you're applying visualization tools to it and try to help the application domain specialist to improve whatever they're doing.
Actually, Anders, you should know that best, right? You wrote that paper. Yeah, I mean, I agree. For me, most of the Vis papers actually are application papers, but some are more application and others are less application, right? So I think the interesting part is always has to be like what you apply a technique to afterwards. Of course, you can come up with basic research before, but then at the end, it has to lead to some application. And for me also, as I was saying before, it doesn't always have to be a completely novel application, right? It could already have been there before, but you try to solve some or answer some questions, some concrete user questions, either in a new way or in a better way than you did before. Yeah.
I'm going to stick out my neck a little bit, and I'm going to say that I think that the application writing community, we're whining a little bit too much. Because we're complaining all the time that our reviews are bad and people don't appreciate applications. I don't think that's true. I think we need to get better at explaining in the application papers what is our contribution. And if that's not clear, it's a bad application paper, because we are in a research community, right? We're not consultants. This is research. So every single paper that we publish has to generate knowledge. And what that knowledge is, what that experience is, needs to be documented. And it could be like a range of different contributions that you have, but you really have to describe that in the paper. And I agree with Helmut. I mean, maybe there's not even a need for a specific application paper category, because all the papers that we have do have some application aspect to them. But we have to be very, very clear what that contribution is. What is it that I have learned? When I read an application paper, I'm always looking for what is the generic, what is the knowledge? Could be anything from, is it I put together existing methods in a very complicated way. This is the way I was thinking about it. This is the way I documented the user requirements. Anything that you gained as an experience that's valuable to distribute to other people, you need to explain in your paper. If you don't do that, it's a bad application paper and it's going to be rejected.
Thank you very much. I will hand over to my colleagues so that I'm not the only one talking.
So the next question is, do you feel like quality measures for reviewing application papers would make sense?
Well, it depends on how you define quality measures, but I think it goes along with Anders was saying, and I mentioned this in my slides too. You have to have some way of showing that there is an improvement, some lessons learned in some way. So in that sense, yeah, we do need some quality criteria.
I agree with that, but it's also very, very difficult to identify those criteria, because I think we're in this sort of moving target with what is an application paper, how does it contribute, and it really connects to all of the other areas that we're looking at as a Vis community. And I know that there are voices who are saying, let's get rid of all these categories of papers because it doesn't really make sense anymore. Why do we have this desire to categorize so much when we really don't need that? We need to look for the contribution rather than looking at what kind of contribution it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not too much to add here, I guess. We are totally in line. One thing that I maybe also wanted to add here is that because it is so difficult to come up with quality measures, right, it might be a good idea to think about inviting researchers from the application fields as well as reviewers, so that more application-specific papers also get additional reviews from application-oriented people, and that might actually help then find out if that is an interesting thing, not only to the Vis community. Of course, it should be interesting to the Vis community, but it should also be interesting to the application fields themselves. So,
Okay, we have a question from the audience, and someone who doesn't want that you guys know who asked the question asked, how do we get more appropriate reviews for application papers? How do we get more appropriate reviews for application papers?
That's a very good question. Helmut kind of led into this a little bit. So getting application domain specialists into the room may be a good way of doing this. Past that, I honestly don't know. Let me think about this.
I think it all boils down to the contribution aspect of your paper. I'm certainly in favor of bringing in a more diverse set of reviewers, getting opinions from the user community. But I also think that in those cases when we do invite the user communities to participate in our conferences, it doesn't really make sense for them to spend a whole week listening to, if you're an astronomer, to listening to what we do in biology in terms of visualization. So I think that's where we're facing that problem of engagement from the audience. But I think it's also a part of a bigger sort of educational effort in terms of how we do reviewing. You know, I've been papers chair this year, the past 2 years now, and it's reading some of the reviews. The quality is sometimes not that great. You can obviously identify that the reviewer has not spent that much time and effort trying to understand what the contribution is, and I think also there's a tendency to try to kill papers a little bit too much, and I think we are sort of limiting the growth and the health of our community. And I'm looking at some of those review statements that Johanna put on here. And when you receive those, in particular, if you're a young researcher coming into our community and the first 5 papers you submit are rejected with nasty reviewing, that's not so good. So to educate the reviewers in trying to encourage more pointing at what are the possibilities, what would I like to see as improvements of this paper to make it easier to understand, or to emphasize what the contributions are. I think that's where we need to go. But you know, another way of looking at sort of the reviewing quality that we have and those metrics is when we identify the people that are joining our program committees. And I think that there is an opportunity for people who have this in mind, because we are now soliciting on the homepage. You can go and register to volunteer as a reviewer. You can volunteer to become a program committee member. And our ambition is to diversify the community quite a bit. And the best way of doing that and to help in that is to volunteer to help out. So I think if you have perspectives, and if you are, in particular, if you have knowledge of a certain domain, I think that's where the application people can come in and say, hey, I have a lot of experience of papers in this particular application domain. And if you clearly state that when you volunteer to review, then there's a likelihood that we get better reviews, a better understanding of those applications.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Yeah, as I said before, trying to invite application domain specialists for the reviewing might help here. Not too much to add otherwise here for the reviewing, but maybe for that aspect that you were bringing up, Anders, of inviting application or domain specialists to the conference, and they wouldn't want to stay for a whole week. I completely understand. I mean, I feel sort of odd here, right? Coming from industry and not from research, and being sort of one of the only ones here. I think one way we could tackle that is like identify a specific application theme every year that we would like to focus on, and inviting specifically papers and applications for that field, and then like concentrating it on one day and inviting people to join us for that one day, something like that.
Thanks. I kind of wanted to riff off of what you guys are saying about contributions. I think that we need to teach our authors also about maybe what contributions to aim for. I think that a lot of people create an application and they say, I made an application, I did this last summer, can I have a paper please? And it's great if you can then look back and say, oh, here's the great contributions in that paper. But sometimes you look back and it's like, oh, I just made another application that's really not that different from some combination of other applications. And I think that means that as you're planning to make these applications, you should be thinking about the research contributions you're trying to make maybe a little bit differently, and shift it so that it will fit into the kind of, so that it will have more contributions that will be publishable. And that's different from explaining your contributions more clearly. So I just wanted to toss that out there. It's not something I'd really thought of before.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. I mean, the application is basically just part of the whole process, and you have to think about how what your contribution specifically is beyond that. And I think some of the comments we had already allude to that, that you have to showcase somehow what you learned, where your improvement is, and think about this for a little while. So kind of the, what I started out with, the application or the visualization is basically just one component, and you should spend probably quite a bit of time on figuring out where the contribution for a paper would exactly be.
I want to bring up another aspect of that, and I think that if you look at the people who write really successful application papers, I think there is one thing that most of them have in common, is that they're not only application people. So I think if you specialize as an application person, that's okay, but I think it's better for a group of people to actually address the whole span from foundational theoretical work. And when I go into the office in the morning, I don't think of myself as being a theory person or algorithmic, or if I'm an application person. I'm sort of curiosity driven, and what I get excited by, and whether that's an application or if it's a theory, that doesn't really matter to me. And I think that's probably a good approach to the whole area of science. What you get excited by is probably something that other people get excited by as well. But I agree with those comments about the importance of thinking about, when you synthesize your research agenda, think about, yes, this is an application, it's motivated by that, but what is it in this particular, why am I picking this domain? Why am I picking these domain experts to work with? Because I find it interesting and I find it challenging from a visualization research perspective as well. I think that component needs to go into your foundation as well.
Min, you want to ask a question? Please.
Thank you. I have quite a few questions. And the first question is to Anders. And Anders obviously really did a wonderful job for chairing. And did you find a scenario sort of in the process, people actually would review application papers without experience developing any applications? Would that be one of the problem? So that's the first question. Maybe think about my second question is, since we sort of have the acceptance rates like 25% or 30%, that kind of scale, so there will be good application papers may be rejected. Then I'm really asking sort of Thomas and Homer to think about maybe how would you sort of what would be the reason for you to reject the other 75% papers, even they are good? So my third question is the current publication model for application papers is correct? Because if we only have a 25% acceptance rate, we should really try to accept more papers. How do we do it? Sorry for asking too many questions.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. Maybe we do it in 2 rounds. So maybe we start with the third question, with the first one. What would be your reason to reject an application paper? And I now do it the other way, that we do a little bit randomization.
Actually, the first one was targeted towards Andres, but anyway, that's actually a good question and a very good comment, right? I mean, I was saying that that I think that every application where you work together with application specialists, they have concrete user questions, you try to answer them, you help them find new answers or find quicker answers, find better answers. It's always valuable. And is it also valuable to be published here? And should then more than 25% be published? And does it fit into the regular reviewing schedule that we have here? I don't know. Maybe in my mind it doesn't fit, right? And it should have higher acceptance rates in that case. But that's an interesting question, yeah.
Well, I'm sort of the person who is not a fan of acceptance rates at all. I think this is a very artificial measure, and I think it's embarrassment for our community that we're relying on such a crude quality metric to look at acceptance rates. I mean, I could easily improve your acceptance rate. I can submit 10 very bad papers, right? And to improve your numbers if you want to keep them low. So I think this is a very, very poor measure of quality. And I think to some extent, this sort of use of acceptance rate as a quality metric is preventing the growth of our community. Look at other communities where they're going journal first, And you know, look at the physics community that I grew up in. You had physical review A, then you filled that one, then you had B, C, D, E, F, right? And that's how that community grew. If they had been looking at acceptance rates in their conferences and rejecting all of their papers, the community would not have been growing in the way that it did. So I think it's time for the visualization community to address that. I'd love to see TVCG A, B, C, D, E, F, with all of those papers being appeared. We are rejecting a lot of good papers. And I think that's a very bad habit that we have in this community. But addressing the issue of application papers, you know, in other places, in some cases, there's a valuable contribution in the application in itself, but it can be expressed in a short paper. And I remember the old SIGGRAPH times when they had what they call the case studies. Like 2 pages of a case study, you just put it out there. This is what I did. If anyone's interested in talking about it, contact me. And maybe that's a model that we can apply to applications here as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, you have 2 factors or overlapping criteria going on. One is for being rejected. It could be that you didn't show that there is that much of a contribution or improvement. But as Anders alluded, the other thing is it just didn't make the cut compared to the other papers. And I absolutely agree that we use the acceptance rate as a criterion instead of the review score, basically. And I don't know, I think we should use the letter, the review score, basically, for accepting, and then whatever it is, that's what it is.
All right. Min, what was your first question? Good point.
My first question for Anders to whether you're in your observation, are there any people review application papers but themselves may not have the experience of writing applications?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer to that is, of course, yes. And I think that some of those comments that we saw from Johanna is based on people who don't have the experience of working with applications that much themselves. And this is, of course, a part of the education of the reviewing community that we need to do, that you need to be able to recognize where the paper is coming from and what kind of value it has. But I think ultimately it's going back to this question that you have to ask yourself as a reviewer: what did I learn from this paper that I didn't know before? And if you have a good solid answer to that question, then it's probably worth looking at that paper closer and maybe accepting it.
Thank you also, Min. For the last round, because we're running out of time, I would like to use, am I standing in the way? No, it's fine. I would like to ask the question from Slido, which got the most upvotes. So this is going to be the last round. And the question is, what are your thoughts on a novel application problem solved with existing, not novel visualization techniques?
I believe I answered that already, but I'll try it again. I think it's totally valid, right? I mean, if it is a completely new application, which is interesting to not just maybe one person, but where you can think about how would that inspire my own work going on from there, it would make sense, even if the techniques themselves are all well known and have been used before. That wouldn't be a problem for me, but I don't know.
I'm going to give you the ultimate question. And I'm not saying this because there's people from NASA in the room, but I mean, the most amazing result that we could help in generating is to answer the question, are we alone? And looking at the data that's coming from exoplanets, from the James Webb Space Telescope. If we can in that data apply visualization technology that helps us to identify if there are planets that could support or are supporting biological molecules in the atmospheres, and looking at if we get that answer that's going to change the history of mankind that day when we get that answer to that question, and if visualization could be a component in reaching that insight, that would be awesome.
I don't know how to top that, but but generally I concur that as long as there's some improvement, if you're helping some application domain specialist to be more efficient, more effective in some way, I think that's a very valid contribution.
Thank you very much. So we have 4 minutes left for a quick wrap up. We would like to thank you very, very much for being our panelists today. That was really great. That was very nice. I took some notes. I think the most important one was from Anders, stop whining. And to maybe that we need to better define the contribution of the paper. That would probably help to also improve the reviews. And I actually really like the idea of probably having domain experts invited as reviewers, because they can really judge whether it solves a real problem or not. I think that was a very interesting comment here. Yeah, I'd like to thank you again. Round of applause for our panelists. Looking forward to see you around at Vis, and now enjoy your coffee break. Thank you very much.